Go.
Happy Flag Day, everyone. Today is a day of great historical significance, not only because it's the day we celebrate the creation of the American flag back on June 14, 1777, but today is also the 250th anniversary of the creation of the Continental Army. Why? It's easy now to think about the fact that America would be independent, that we'd have an American army, but to really appreciate the significance of today's events, I want to take you back to what the first delegates of the Second Continental Congress were going through back on June 14, 1775. There was a strong peace contingent, people who both wanted to remain part of the British Empire and were absolutely opposed to armed conflict with Britain. Think of someone like John Dickinson, who was the strongest voice for peace and rapprochement with the British Empire. Someone who had written the Letters of a Pennsylvania Farmer, who perhaps was the strongest voice for the legal rights of the American colonies, still wanted peace with Britain. Why was that? As a constitutional expert of the British Constitution, he understood that the rights that the Americans had was based on the fact that they were still Englishmen, that all of their rights that they had as being free Englishmen carried over as free settlers to this colony. But if they had taken up arms against Britain and were defeated, they would essentially forfeit those rights, and America would be seen as a conquered territory, not unlike the way that the British treated the island of Ireland. So he was opposed to taking up arms, but at the same time, you had particularly the delegation from the New England colonies who were suffering under everything Great Britain had done in Massachusetts and we saw in New York, and they were ready to fight. And it wasn't just New England too. One of the most prominent voices for arming all of the colonies against Great Britain was George Washington himself. He was the only delegate to show up to the Second Continental Congress in uniform, and he had a commanding presence. He was the one who strongly proposed on June 14th that expert riflemen be called out from Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Virginia to join all those fighters in Massachusetts under a unified command structure. He just didn't think he would be the one leading it. In fact, Patrick Henry, who was also a delegate from Massachusetts and the president of the Continental Congress, just assumed he would be the one named to be the commander of the unified Continental Army. But John Adams, also from Massachusetts, had a keener understanding of politics, knew that Virginia was the most populous and most prosperous colony, and the only way that all of the colonies could be united in helping to defend the colony of Massachusetts from the British forces would be if a Virginian was at the head. And George Washington, remember, he was only a colonel in the British Army. There were several Americans, including other delegates at the Continental Congress, who were of higher rank in the British Army. But that actually worked against them because they did not. Adams also understood that people wouldn't want someone who would be seen as being too British. We would want someone who is all American. And George Washington had a certain gravitas. He was a commanding figure, even if, and maybe because of his soft-spokenness. He was someone who carried weight with people. This is why historians now see Washington as the indispensable American. And John Adams, working in the background in taverns and hotel rooms of the Continental Congressional delegates, was able to secure support for Washington to be named as the commander-in-chief. When Washington learned about this, he was astonished. He did not want this at all. He feared that this would ruin his reputation and it would be the worst thing for him. But by that point, it was already too late. So on June 14th, the Continental Congress created and acknowledged the army that was already in effect was a Continental Army of the United Colonies. And the very next day, Washington stayed in his hotel room as they nominated him unanimously to be the single general and commander-in-chief of the Continental Army. And then the day after that, Washington, in some ways, and in a way that was very humble, but accepted his commission. And then the Continental Congress went on to to create subordinate officers for that army. And the birth of what is now the American Army was complete. So I want to wish a very happy 250th birthday to the United States Army, and thank all of you who have served in the U.S. Army and those who continue to serve. And God bless you all. God bless America.